Welcome back, ghouls and gals, to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, all things horror, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your spooky host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other spooky host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, man.
Hey, man.
Hey, man. What are you up to?
Well, dude, I mean, the other day, it was like perfect. Let's just put it this way. It was early in the morning. The sky was still just black as coal. Stars in the sky shining down. But, dude, the fullest moon I've seen in such a long time. The air it was 39 degrees. And then like a little bit of clouds here and there would like pass by this full moon. And I swear, dude, I kept on being like, is there about to be a werewolf here?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it feels like October, man. And I am just, we say it every week, especially during the October Spooktacular. But this is our favorite time of year, man. The leaves are falling. It's spooky. It's just great, man. I love it.
Yeah. Another thing that I thought of recently that kind of made me laugh is like, I would imagine that some people listening are a little probably more jaded because they listen to so many podcasts and they're like, we get it. Like, you guys aren't professional. You're talking about the weather every time. But my thought is eventually there's going to be an apocalypse.
Okay.
And
interesting.
If my kids have the ability to listen back to when weather was normal.
Still happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you guys are going to have a different tune then.
Well, hey, man. And also, like, I don't know, whatever makes people happy. And fall weather happens to make us, you know, overjoyed and just happy.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
dude,
man.
You know what I was thinking about the other day? Even just like walking through my neighborhood and just kind of looking over the shoulder and seeing if there's werewolves. Anytime we talk about like spooky things, or I should say most of the time, you know, we talk about creatures, beasts with, you know, they could chase you down or sneak up on you, creatures in the woods, you know, crawling around and all this kind of stuff. We talk about cryptid creatures that, you know, are scary, and they're just out there mostly just kind of walking around. Sometimes on the show, we talk about like, you know, look up to the skies and stuff. And when we talk about that, generally I would say that we're referring to like UFOs and beings from other, you know, planets or dimensions or whatever, right?
Whatever.
Well, so Tyler turned me on to this story that comes out of Kentucky, and it comes from this like obscure collection of scary stories and spookiness. And that's one of our favorite things. It reminds us of being kids, going to the book fair and getting like just these strange books with scary stories from other places. And since we've been, you know, talking about a lot of folklore in the South and stuff, it's kind of fitting that one of the first stories that we're going to talk about today is out of Kentucky. Now, what I like about this story is that it's not just about creatures that are crawling around or walking around in the woods around us. This is about creatures that might be bringing their terror from the skies. So buckle up and let me tell you about one of the strangest stories I've ever heard that's actually haunted an area for over a century.
Wow.
This is the story of the Vanishing Bird Family. It all starts around the year 1900. Around the turn of the 20th century, there was a family unlike any other. Living high above the North Fork of the Kentucky River. Isolated and mysterious, this peculiar family was said to have 9 members. They kept to themselves in a large, oblong log house, perched on a ridge where few dared to venture. The neighbors, scarce as they were, whispered about their strangeness and how they allowed no one to enter their home. On rare occasions, passers-by along the road below would hear something disturbing, screams cutting through the still night air, followed by the unmistakable sound of large wings flapping in the darkness. As if some immense creature lurked just out of sight. Or still, there were rumors of strange, high-pitched voices and the chilling thud of blows like the sickening sound of someone being beaten. By the creek near Williams Fork, people claim to hear splashes in the dead of night, as if heavy objects were being tossed into the water. Yet despite these disturbing noises, no one ever saw lights in the windows, nor smoke rising from the chimney. As the years passed, curiosity began to grow, but so did the unease. Behind the house, a small graveyard appeared. No one in the nearby villages had ever heard of a death in the family, but the graves kept multiplying. Soon, there were more than 50 crude stones, each one marking the final resting place of someone or something. Strangely, the family members still appeared from time to time in the local village, always buying the same necessities. They seemed unchanged. It had been years, yet they never aged a day. They were small, slight of build, and walked with a quick, almost jerking gait. But it was their faces, sharp, bird-like even, with long, thin noses and receding chins that really unsettled the few who saw them up close. The locals could no longer ignore the growing mystery. After a decade of whispers and unanswered questions, a group of men, fueled by fear and curiosity, decided to confront the family once and for all. How had they survived all these years with no livestock, no crops, and no signs of life from their strange house? And why did that graveyard continue to expand? On a clear, moonlit night, 50 men gathered. They split into two groups, approaching the house from both the front and the back. As they crept closer, they saw something that sent shivers down their spines. From the roof of the house, 9 enormous birds took flight, vanishing into the night sky. The men entered the house, but inside, there was nothing. No furniture, no clothing, no tools. Just piles of straw that looked disturbingly like nests. They searched every corner but found only the eerie remains of what must have been the family's roost. The next morning, the men turned their attention to the graveyard. One by one, they exhumed the graves. But what they discovered was even more horrifying than they could have imagined. The small skeletons they unearthed were human, but with an impossible twist. Each one had an additional set of bones along the shoulders, hollow like those of birds. These bones suggested something unthinkable. The family had somehow developed the ability to fly. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, the men burned the house to the ground. No one dared go near the place again, and in time, all traces of the house, the cemetery, and even the road disappeared into the landscape. But even now, high on that ridge above the river, some say that large, black birds can still be seen, watching, waiting. They seem far too large to be normal birds, and those who wander too close swear that at times, it almost seems like they're trying to speak. Now, dude, it's an incredible story, and interestingly enough, it would be incredible, I should say, if it was just fiction, right? Somebody just came up with a story. It's pretty cool. It's old. It's kind of creepy. Again, it has that same rural vibe that the stories from a few weeks ago did. But here's the kicker, dude. The author of this story, his grandmother was born in 1877, and she actually was the one that heard this tale firsthand from the very men who dug up the graves and burned the house. It's a story that's, of course, been passed down through their family through generations. I mean, I don't know, man. Just imagining walking into like this dilapidated sort of log house or cabin.
Yeah.
And you open it up and there's no furniture. There's just like these weird nests.
It's one of those stories that I don't know. I love it so much because it's from this like sort of collection of stories by a guy named Michael Paul Henson, and it's called Tragedy at Devil's Hollow and More Kentucky Ghost Stories. And it's one of those books. I mean, we've all seen them if you live here in the States where, or I don't know, maybe not, here in the South especially, like if you go to like, you know, like your local pharmacy or whatever, they'll usually be these like local published books. You know, it'll be like ghost stories of whatever town you're in, or like Haunted Georgia, you know, those kind of books. And I imagine that that's what this is. So it probably doesn't have that much of a wide set, you know, audience. But again, like we're always talking about like, hey, if you have your own ghost story and your own like sort of local urban legend that is, you know, isn't quite mainstream or out in the internet, it's like one of those kind of things that just, it sort of stays in your little town. That's why we love those things, because they're kind of like this story where, you know, it's spooky, it's like high strangeness, but it's something that's been passed down, you know, from in like a family, which is like just super cool.
Absolutely, man. And like I said at the top of the show, you know, so often we don't think of terror or horror coming from the skies. And it's rare that we even talk about any kind of like bird-like humanoid. I mean, the obvious, you know, right out of the gate, anybody that if you think of bird-like humanoid, everyone's going to say...
Oh, well, Thunderbird, Mothman. Yeah.
Mothman, right? Yeah. The Thunderbird, mainly
not a humanoid.
Just the fact that it's a creature. Yeah, it's not a humanoid. But that got me kind of thinking too, like, okay, well, we're talking about some Southern folklore here in this story. What's it like across the world, you know? And because that's one of the things that we love the most is just thinking about how there are certain tropes that are common no matter where you are in the world. And so I started looking it up and I found a ton of these things. Let's take a quick break. And when we get back, let's dive into some flying bird-like humanoids from around the world.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
All right, so here are some of the ones that I found that don't necessarily remind me of the, I guess, the bird family that disappeared in Kentucky, but they do sort of, it is close enough to where it's just interesting that all these different cultures across the globe have a bird-like humanoid that, I don't know, it's just interesting. So the first one we're going to talk about is called the Tengu, which is from Japan.
Yep.
And Tengu are a famous part of Japanese folklore, often depicted as bird-like humanoids with both human and avian traits. They are sometimes shown with the wings and beak of a bird, while other depictions have them looking more human with bird heads or long noses. They're associated with the mountains and forests, acting as both protectors and tricksters. In some stories, they have magical powers, can fly, and are excellent warriors. They can be benevolent, even stories talking about how they teach martial arts to humans, but also they can be malevolent, causing a lot of havoc within villages, which is kind of a common thing that we see with any kind of creature, especially from Japan, is, it's sort of like what we talked about the other night when we recorded our Patreon episode. They do a great job of sort of showing the yin and the yang, I guess, of any kind of creature.
Mm-hmm.
There's some good stuff, there's some bad stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's pretty interesting. The next one is kind of near and dear to my heart because of where it kind of originates, and that is the Garuda. Now, those of you listening for the first time may or may not know that growing up as a youngster, I actually had the opportunity and lived in Jakarta, Indonesia. And so the Garuda is a Hindu and Buddhist, it comes from Hindu and Buddhist mythology, but, that's like the national airline for Indonesia. It's Garuda Airlines.
Oh, wow.
So it was just all over the
That's
place.
cool.
Here's what the creature is. It's a massive eagle-like divine creature from, again, Hindu and Buddhist mythology. In the Hindu stories, he's the mount of Lord Vishnu, depicted as a powerful being with the body of a human and the wings and beak of an eagle. The Garuda is known for its incredible speed, strength, and ability to fly between the heavens and the earth, representing strength, power, and the eternal struggle against evil, particularly the Nagas or serpents. While the Garuda is often seen as this heroic figure in Hindu and Buddhist mythology, some regional folk tales paint a much darker picture. In some legends, particularly in rural regions, it is said that the Garuda can appear as a terrifying force of vengeance. There are these stories of Garuda-like creatures attacking travelers in the dead of night, their shadowy forms descending from the sky to snatch the unwary. These tales typically emphasize the awe and fear surrounding such creatures and their inhuman, otherworldly nature. Now, interestingly enough, there are these enormous eagles and birds of prey in the jungles of Indonesia and Southeast Asia. They can they're big enough and strong enough, and their talons are big enough to freaking swoop down and grab a monkey by its head.
Yeah, dude.
An ape by its head even, and just fly off.
I mean, it's kind of funny because I remember as a kid, my grandmother would tell stories of how she told her kids, so like my Uncle Stuart, my mom and stuff, that her grandmother had told her about these buzzards that were so big, like way, way, way a long time ago, that they were so big that they could swoop in. If the kids got off the porch, they could swoop down and they could carry a kid away. Now that was clearly probably a cautionary tale, but I've always thought back at what if there was some truth to that, And it is creepy. It's weird.
Yeah. A lot of these cautionary tales that we've uncovered or remembered in our show, a lot of them have there's got to be some sort of element of truth in there,
Yep.
All right, staying in Southeast Asia, there's this creature called the Canary. It's another mythological creature from Buddhist and Hindu folklore, specifically more found in Thailand and Cambodia. And these are depicted as half bird, half human, often portrayed with the upper body of a beautiful woman and the lower body of a bird. They are known for their grace and beauty and musical abilities. Their male counterparts, though, they're called Kinaras, are also depicted in various myths, but it's the Canary that are more prominent in folklore. Like that one, for example, I couldn't really find anything nefarious about it. Some of these that we're kind of more familiar with, for example, the harpy
I was about to ask.
in Greek mythology, they're these notorious figures in Greek mythology that are depicted as these winged women with sharp claws who would swoop down and steal food or souls. These creatures were feared for their fierce avian-like features and their association with death and torment.
Dude, real quick, did you see the VHS, the first VHS movie? Like the movie VHS, like the horror movie?
Like a found footage movie?
Yeah, it's little vignettes. Well, there's one, I think it actually maybe the first little story or whatever, but I've never thought of like harpies in a way of like being sort of scary, but they, and I don't want to like spoil it, but there is a harpy, and
Too late.
dude, it's like
Wait a second,
terrifying.
dude. I think I did see this. This is the movie where like this guy, like they're like doing something with this girl. They convince her to go back. One's like super drunk.
Yes.
And then is that what I'm
Yeah,
thinking? Is that
that's the
right?
one.
Yeah. I did see that.
Yeah, dude, it's made me never think of harpies in the same way.
Yeah. Man, I'm glad you brought that up.
And also, I do think that it's interesting because before you got to the harpy, what was the name of the one before?
Canary?
Well, you said that's like the male counterpart. What's the female one though?
No, the male counterpart is the Canaris.
Canaras. Okay. Yeah, it's one of those things where we always get into this, and it's one of the fascinating things about what we do and what the show is about. Where, when you're researching every week all these different things from like around the globe, it reminds me of like the Fomorians and this sort of like crossover of like different cultures, and like it's like, yeah, sure, like they're going to interpret these things differently through the context of their cultural zeitgeist, but it's like I think it's so interesting when you come across these things that are like clearly the same, at least the same source for the inspiration.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, like similar characteristics enough to say like it's the same creature almost, but just with a different name.
Right. Yeah.
So just another example. This creature called the siren, it comes from Slavic mythology. Okay, it's a bird-like woman, similar to the harpy, has the body of a bird and the head of a beautiful woman. I like where this is going. Oh, yeah. But the funny thing is, this is also a detail that we see across different types of creatures, and that is that the siren is said to sing beautifully these enchanting songs that, you guessed it, lure people to their doom.
Yeah.
It's almost like
the sirens.
Hold on. Yeah, no. And is that like a different, did I pronounce it incorrectly? It's Sirin. And so maybe it really is a siren, but spelled Slavically like that.
Yeah. Same thing, dude.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's sometimes portrayed as a symbol of happiness and a messenger of the gods. But, it's always like these things that are like, they're luring people, humans, to their doom. And it's funny, we talk about the Fomorians and these creatures that exist sort of, quote unquote, all around us as when I say us, I mean humanity, that don't really have a place in it all or don't feel like they do. And so maybe that's what kind of, some of them feel cheated and some of them are getting their revenge. Others feel like, man, I want to help these beings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here's another one from Greece that I had actually not heard of, and it's called the Periton.
Never heard of it.
This creature, imagine like a deer with like horns and all, and then like wings, okay? It's a powerful flyer. This deer-like Periton may perhaps have been related to the winged Pegasus of Greece. According to early writers, the beast had one unique characteristic. This is so freaking cool, dude. I've never heard of this. The shadow it cast was that of a man, which led scholars to believe that Peritons were the spirits of wayfarers who had died far away from home.
Oh, wow.
The creatures were sighted frequently in classical times over Mediterranean islands and near the Strait of Gibraltar. They were thought to be man-eaters, swooping in flocks upon unsuspecting sailors and devouring them. No weapon could avail against the strength of the Peritons. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's interesting. I love and again, I mean, it kind of ties into what we were just talking about. I love the usage of like shadows in a lot of these sort of paranormal, supernatural kind of like folklore, because like, I don't know, I've always just thought it was so interesting. I mean, that probably stems from like, Peter Pan, which I still think is really cool that he like lost his shadow, and like, a lot of cultures, like they tie like your shadow being like sort of a representation of your soul, or like a connection, your sort of supernatural astral connection to your body. And I've always thought that was just really, really fascinating. The idea that like it can carry like different characteristics, like beyond like just your physical, shape and everything. It's cool.
It's also kind of terrifying to think of anything that would be capable of like manipulating
Yeah.
that. And imagine like you're just standing on a path or something and you're in, ancient times and the sun's behind you and you see this like other shadow come up and, obviously it might be alarming if you weren't expecting someone to be there and you just see a man, but it's going to be a heck of a lot more alarming if it looks like a winged deer creature.
Yeah.
Instead, it's just a man shadow. You're like, oh, that's not a big deal. I'm going to continue plowing the field or whatever, and then this thing eats you.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know why my mind goes to this, but it kind of takes me. I wonder the similarities between like sort of like the like vampire lore, where like the reflection in the mirror, like they have no reflection, like it. I don't know. For some reason, like my mind kind of like ties those together, like your shadow or your reflection, like being different from what your sort of physical appearance is.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like it's almost like or not but like they're existing in like another like plane in a way, or than their like physical self. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating.
Man, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Next, well, of course, you've got like the Valkyries in Norse mythology, but they're more just like warrior women and not necessarily bird-like.
Almost like the Amazons.
Yeah. They are often associated with birds, especially like ravens and their ability to sort of fly between realms.
Well, I thought they were like rode like Pegasi.
Yeah. Yep. Some of them, in some depictions, though, they are shown with wings or as shapeshifters even. But this next one, I'm sure we're going to end up at some point doing a full breakdown of this just because it's super fascinating as well. And this one comes from, and it's more modern in folklore, and it comes from Cornwall, England, and that's the Owlman.
Oh, cool.
So similar to the Mothman, the Owlman is a modern cryptid from Cornwall, England, first reported in the 1970s. One of the most chilling bird-like cryptid tales. The Owlman is said to have first appeared in 1976 near the church of Mownan in Cornwall, England. Witnesses described the creature as a humanoid figure with large, you guessed it, glowing red eyes, sharp talons, and massive wings resembling those of an owl. Several young girls reported seeing this menacing figure hovering above the church tower, giving rise to rumors that it was a dark omen. Locals began to connect the sightings with the curse on the church grounds, and many believe that the creature is still seen in the area, particularly on stormy nights.
One of the things that I typically relate the concept of like, oh, and then this thing had red eyes. Like, I feel like it's so sort of like cliche in like the modern age because you see it just so often. Anything that's evil has like red eyes. But I was kind of thinking a while back, like, like pre, television or any of that stuff, like the idea of like the red eyes being so prominent with these, like cryptids or anything sort of supernatural, demonic maybe.
Right.
It's really interesting. It is actually interesting when you think of it like before the modern age where we had all these like visuals, because it's like, okay, well, if maybe they were making that up, like where did that even come from?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and also thinking about it in terms of like, maybe they think of it as red because they're like kind of, reflecting light in their mind. It's glowing, It's the same like whenever I see dadgum
Like eye shine.
deer eyes in the forest or cats, in the neighborhood and stuff. And the other day I saw a fox.
Oh, I love
And
them.
it was different enough from a distance that I had to stop and I thought, what is that? And then I saw the coloring and I thought one of my dumb outdoor cats was following me through the neighborhood, which, I don't want him to get run over.
Right.
So I was like, looking, squinting my eyes, and then it's like, oh, it's a fox. So maybe there's some of that going on. Maybe it's a, mechanized creature, and those, are glowing because they've got some sort of infrared, thing. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool.
But if you think about it, though, if you're in the dark, they're not going to have the technology. They have these crummy lanterns.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you fast forward enough, now let's say 1970, these girls are going to have these crappy like metal flashlights. I'm sure they call them torches, shining up to the sky. It's not going to reach. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just like crappy. My freaking LED headlamp literally looks like, I don't know what, man. It's like it'll just light up the road.
Yeah.
Like crazy.
Yeah.
And so that's a luxury they did not have. And so, you know, anything that you see out in the woods, any kind of eyes, if they just barely catch the light, it's going to look scary, man. I mean, it's just terrifying to think of.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe it is like an eye shine thing, but I don't know that would, I mean, I guess like sort of like the flickering torch, you would see like that sort of reflection in the eyes, but I don't know. I feel like the idea of like red glowing eyes is like, like
It's much different, much more sinister.
yeah, and it goes back like a lot further too, you know, so.
You can also just immediately feel the just terror that they must have felt seeing something just like, well, like I did whenever I saw something red and glowing in the woods.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now, this one is called the Adzi, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right because it comes from West Africa.
Oh, yeah, probably not.
In this folklore, the Iwi people of West Africa have this vampiric creature that can shapeshift into a firefly or take on a more humanoid form, which is really unique. I've not heard of that before.
Yeah.
In its human form, the Adzi is described as having bird-like characteristics such as elongated fingers that resemble talons. Kind of reminds me of,
Nosferatu.
well, yeah, in Salem's Lot, you know, like those long, thin,
Yeah.
scary-looking fingers. It's said to drain its victims' blood and life force, and people who encounter it are often left in a state of fear or sickness afterward. It's feared for its ability to fly unseen and strike in the dead of night.
Wow.
Another one, the Kashihan in Japanese folklore, it's, you know, lesser known creature, but it's described as this monstrous bird-like demon that lurks in the forests. It's said to appear after dark, its large wings and glowing eyes creating an otherworldly silhouette against the night sky. And you're going to love this, and so is Tim Marshenko. The Kashihan is known for mimicking, so nervous, he said it's so weird. The Kashihan is known for mimicking human voices, often luring travelers off the path before descending on them. Those who have survived an encounter with the creature would often return in a delirious state, muttering about, quote, a man with the face of a bird.
Wow.
It was believed to be a curse to hear the Kashihan's call, foretelling death or even disaster. Which is a similar trope that we hear when talking about things like the Mothman, you know, being that harbinger of doom.
Yeah. Well, and also the, what is it? The Chernobyl
Yeah.
blackbird?
Oh, come on. Yeah, the blackbird of Chernobyl.
Yeah, blackbird of Chernobyl, yeah.
Yeah. And even in a way, I'm wondering if the Owlman has some similarities there too. This one is called the Chiguapa. It's from Dominican folklore.
I think we've talked
And
about
it's this mysterious, haunting creature. It's described as a beautiful bird-like woman with backwards-facing feet. The Chiguapa is said to roam the forest and mountains at night, luring men to their doom with her enchanting cries.
Yeah, we definitely covered that on the episode.
When we talked about, what was it?
I don't know, but they were all like based on like, you know, I'm sure we were heavy into disembodied voices, but
Yeah, in the jungle and stuff.
yeah, but it was like that idea of like this thing that's like trying to lure people out, like oh, it sounds like a baby crying or a woman in distress.
Yeah.
You know.
And here's what's crazy. It's not explicitly, you know, bird-like in appearance, but the way she moves and the eerie cries that accompany her sightings evoke the image of a predatory bird kind of stalking its prey. And here's the sort of thing that's kind of crazy. According to the legend, once a man is ensnared by the Chiguapa, he's never seen again. But then there are many tales of men disappearing in the jungles, and then after disappearing, they are found later, far away from the village, their bodies twisted and lifeless as though dropped from great heights.
Yeah, that's one of those things, those accounts of like the cattle mutilations. I think like Linda Moulton Howe talked about these, where they had all these, crazy like physical injuries that could only come from them like, falling from like hundreds of feet in the sky. I don't know, there's just something so like sinister and just like kind of sad and creepy about that.
Yeah. Definitely sad, definitely creepy. And again, to know that like, it's like, dude, if I can just run fast, I can, maybe, or if I can climb a tree, and now we've got creatures that can just swoop down and grab me and then drop me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just nuts, dude. Lastly, this one's pretty cool too. And this is coming from the Amazon rainforest, which on its own anyway, just typical creatures, the ones we know about for sure, are also scary, So in the remote regions of the Amazon, there's this creature called the Boraro, also known as palm people. And they're described as these like bird-like humanoids that stalk the jungle, standing tall with long legs, sharp talons. And these creatures are said to hunt with almost eerie silence, moving swiftly through the thick foliage. Their most terrifying feature, though, is their bird-like face and a throat that produces this unsettling whistling sound that disorients their prey.
Like my nose.
Exactly like your nose and tooth whistle.
It's not a tooth whistle, it's my nose, which is even more embarrassing.
Man alive. According to the legend, though, the Boraro crushes its victims' bones and drinks their blood, leaving their bodies behind as these empty shells. Isn't that crazy, though, man?
Yeah, that's weird.
And this is, honestly, I found a bunch more, but this is sort of just scratching the surface. There's, again, this trope of these creatures, most of them not good, some of them, I think there might be some, maybe there's, this one's good and la da 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 da. So many of them, though, it is this creature that comes at night, whether it's vampiric, whether it's just coming to like get you. If you think about it in terms of, I don't know, that's part of the reason why I think vampires in general, and even werewolves, I guess, but vampires mostly, are kind of interesting to me in terms of the lore, because it's like, if you think of them as not even like human, not even evolved human, but sort of just like another animal.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They have to eat and they have prey, and it just so happens that we're the prey.
Yeah.
It really is like, you're looking at like the food chain and the fact that, or if you're looking at humans in general, and we're such a dominant sort of being on Earth. And then and I think in some movies and shows and stuff, they kind of depict this where like vampires, sometimes in shows they'll show like, or in movies, they'll show how vampires think of themselves as like highly like evolved humans.
Right. And
this is just the way that evolution is going. I think like even Interview with a Vampire, Lestat kind of mentions something like that. Like, hey, stop feeling bad about it. This is just how evolution is going. And we just happen to be, the dominant one.
Well, also, one of the things that I like about, especially sort of that Anne Rice style of vampire is like, you're gonna have like a level of like elitism just because like you've been able to live like multiple lifetimes, and so of course you've like figured a lot of it, more like you figured out what life is about, because you've lived like
and
several.
Also like what on earth besides like a handful of like rules like don't go out in the sunlight, what on earth could you be like, how on earth could you be threatened by like a human? You're way stronger, all this stuff.
Right.
And so mixing that into all of this, it's so interesting to me that there are these tropes that exist across the world about these like flying creatures.
Yeah, there's one that you left out, which definitely deserves its own show, because it's one of the...
We will return after these messages.
It's a pretty cool place. If you're a Martian,
Or a vampire. You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you? We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler, and you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show.
I don't know that I would say like A level, but is the Van Meter Visitor. Have you heard about that? You know, sort of like quick and loose. It's almost like a pterodactyl / half human. It has like a horn on its head, which kind of reminds me of what was this cartoon from like the 70s where it wasn't Gigantor, or no, it's not Gigantor, or like Thundar the Barbarian. I think maybe it was on that show where there was like these characters that were, and they were probably inspired by this. This comes out in like early 1900s Iowa, pterodactyl / human with a horn on its forehead that shoots out like blasts of light. But, you know, I guess kind of a flying humanoid. But yeah, it's a weird, fascinating one where I think eventually like the whole town kind of like rallies around and they end up like trapping it in a cave and like blowing up the cave maybe. Speaking of weird cryptids and characters, one of the things that I've been into so much lately is, and we have to do an episode. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm coming over tomorrow.
Okay. All right.
I'm bringing you every one of my Hellboy volumes.
Okay, and also included in that,
The Long Halloween, I know.
The Long Halloween, and also Disembodied Voices that you've had for 2 years.
I'm probably going to keep that one. Just being honest, being transparent. But it is Mike Mignola's masterpiece, Hellboy. The reason I love it is it's all the things that we're into. And I cannot believe that you haven't read any of it yet, or thus far. But it's this character called Hellboy, travels around. He's been around since like the 40s, but he's not quite human. He's kind of like meant to be this, bringer of doom, like demonic kind of, warlord from hell kind of thing. But he's sort of adopted by this like professor who's a part of this thing called the Bureau of Paranormal Defense. Oh, wait. No. The Bureau of Research and Paranormal Defense, I think. It's BRPD. Or no, BPRD. Paranormal Research and Defense. Good God. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. And so it kind of changes the path of what he was supposed to become. So he's this hulking character. He has like this giant sort of made of stone, like red right hand. But it's really cool. Anyway, all that to say, you've got to read it because it's perfect for the Halloween season. Secondly, it always, anytime I read Mike Mignola's stuff, and I don't know that I've seen online anybody else make this comparison, but to me, I don't think Mike Mignola could be possible without the work of a guy named Manly Wade Wellman. Mm-hmm. He's one of my all-time favorites. He has this character called Silver John, or I think John the Balladeer is like another kind of name for him. But he's just this character who's sort of same kind of thing. He's sort of this like, I don't want to say flat in like a demeaning way, but he's just sort of this character who is kind of like sort of, plopped into these different situations. He kind of just travels around like Appalachia, and he has this guitar that has like silver strings, and it's just really, really cool. Sadly and embarrassingly enough, I'm only really sort of familiar with Silver John, Manly Wade Wellman's character Silver John. He has these other characters, one called John Thunstone, who's basically a scholar and a playboy who investigates mysterious supernatural events. And, he has this like cane that has like a sword with, you guessed it, a silver blade that is said to be forged by Saint Dunstan, the patron saint of silversmiths and noted opponent of the devil. The blade is inscribed with the text from Judges chapter 5 in the Vulgate, "Thus perish all your enemies." This is kind of cool because this I guess the sword is also used by his other character, Judge Percivant, who passed it to Thunstone when his advanced age made him too weak to effectively wield it. But they like fight Ghost, and I mean, it's so much like Hellboy, you know?
Yeah. And also, and when was it written?
Oh, dude. So let me read a little about Manly Wade Wellman. He was born May 21st, 1903 to 1986. He's an American writer, science fiction, fantasy. One of the biggest contributors to the legendary magazine Weird Tales. He was, oddly enough, like to write about Appalachia and Silver John and stuff. He was born in Kamundongo, Portuguese West Africa, but then eventually died in, his later years. He lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But he won the Edgar Allan Poe Award, which is like a big thing, the World Fantasy Award. He was a nominee to be a Pulitzer Prize winner in 1956. This dude's just like, I just want him to be more widely known, because I think he's I don't know, maybe he had like bigger fame like back in the day, but it's even said that Gary Gygax, the creator of Dungeons and Dragons, based his bard character on that of Silver John.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does. Yeah. Yeah, and even just that, like, alone, like on its own, is such a weird concept of, and I know it feels like we're, driving away from the dock, but
we're not, because I feel like there's a purpose behind this connection here.
There is a purpose, and that is we're going to play you out with a story that is, I guess, one of his more widely known short stories, Manly Wade Wellman, and that is Oh Ugly Bird. I swear I'm licked before I start, trying to tell you all what Mr. Anselm looked like. Words give out. For instance, you're frozen to death for fit words to tell the favor of the girl you love, and Mr. Anselm and I pure poison hated each other. That's how love and hate are alike. He was what country folks called a low man. More than calling him short or small, a low man is low otherwise than by inches. Mr. Anselm's shoulders didn't wide out as far as his big ears, and they sank and sagged. His thin legs bowed in at the knee and out of the shank. Like two sickles point to point on his carrot-thin neck, his head looked like a swollen, pale gourd. Thin, mossy gray hair, loose mouth, a bit open to show long, even teeth. Not much of a chin. The right eye squinted, mean and dark, while the hike of his brow twitched, the left one wide. His good clothes fitted his mean body like they were cut to it. Those good clothes were almost as much out of match to the rest of him as his long, soft, pink hands, the hands of a man who never had to work a tap. You see what I mean? I can't say how he looked, only he was hateful. I first met him when I came down from the high mountains comb along an animal trail. Maybe a deer made it. Through the trees I saw here and there in the valley below, patch places and cabins and yards. I'd hoped I'd get fed at one of them, for I'd run clear out of eating some spell back. I had no money, only my hickory shirt and blue ducking pants, and torn old army shoes and my guitar on its sling card. But I knew the mountain folk, and they've got everything to eat. A decent spoken stranger can get half the part of it. Towns aren't always the same way. Downslope I picked, favoring the guitar in case I slipped and fell, and in an hour made it to the first patch. Early fall was browning the corn out of the green. The cabin was 2-room, dog-trotted, open in the middle. Beyond was a shed and a pig pen. In the yard, the man of the house talked to who I found out later was Mr. Anselm. "No meat at all?" said Mr. Anselm. His voice was the last you'd expect him to have, full of broad, low music, like an organ in a town church. I decided against asking him to sing when I glimpsed him closer, sickle-legged and gourd-headed and pale and puny in his fine-fitting clothes, for he looked mad and dangerous. And the man of the place, though he was big, strong old gentleman with a square jaw, looked afraid. "I've been short this year, Mr. Anselm," he said, begging like. The last bit of meat I fished out of the brine on Tuesday, and I don't want to have to kill the pig till December. Mr. Anselm tramped over to the pen. The pig was a friendly one. It reared its front feet against the boards and grunted up to him. Mr. Anselm spit into the pen. "All right," he said, "but I want some meal." He sickle-legged back to the cabin. A brown barrel stood in the dog trot. Mr. Anselm lifted the cover and pinched some meal between his pink fingertips. "Give me a sack," he told the man. The man went indoors and brought out the sack. Mr. Anselm held it open while the man scooped out meal enough to fill it. Then Mr. Anselm held it tight shut while the man lashed the neck with twine. Finally, Mr. Anselm looked up and saw me standing there. "Who are you?" he asked, sort of crooning. "My name's John," I said. "John what?" Then, without waiting for my answer, "Where did you steal that guitar?" "It was given to me," I replied. "I strung it with silver wires myself." "Silver," he said, and opened his squint eye by a trifle. With my left hand, I clamped the cord. With my right thumb, I picked a whisper from the silver strings. I began to make a song. "Mr. Anselm, they do what you tell 'em." "That will do," said Mr. Anselm, not so musically, and I stopped playing. He relaxed. "They do what I tell 'em," he said, half to himself. "Not bad." We studied each other for a few ticks of time. Then he turned and tramped out of the yard, in among the trees. When he was out of sight, the man of the place asked, right friendly, what he could do for me. "I'm just walking through," I said. "I didn't want to ask right off for some dinner." "I heard you name yourself John," he said. "So happens my name's John too, John Bristow." "Nice place you've got, John," I said, looking around. "Cropper or tenant?" "I own the house and the land," he told me. And I was surprised, for Mr. Anselm had treated him the way a mean boss treats a cropper. "Then that Mr. Anselm, he was just a visitor?" I said. "Visitor," Mr. Bristow snorted. "He visits everybody around here. Lets them know what he wants and they pass it to him. Thought you knew him. You sang about him so ready." "Ah, shucks, I made that up." I touched the silver strings again. "I sing a many a new song that comes to me. I love the old songs better," he said and smiled. So I sang one. "I had been in Georgia not a many more weeks than 3 when I fell in love with a pretty fair girl, and she fell in love with me. Her lips were red as red could be, her eyes brown as brown. Her hair was like the thundercloud before the rain comes down." "You should have seen Mr. Bristow's face shine," he said. "By God, you sure enough can sing it and play it." "I do my possible best," I said, "but Mr. Anselm doesn't like it." I thought a moment, then asked, "What way can he get everything he wants in this valley?" "Shoo, can't tell you that way, just done it for years he has." "Anybody refuse him?" "Well, once old Jim Desborough refused him a chicken." Mr. Anselm pointed his finger at old Jim's mules. "They was plowing, them mules couldn't move area foot, not till Mr. Anselm had the chicken." Another time, Miss Tilly Palmer hid a cake when she had seen him come. He pointed a finger and dumbed her. She never spoke one mumbling word from that day to when she died. You could hear and understand, but when she tried to talk, she could just wheeze. "He's a hoodoo man," I said, which means the law can't do anything. Not even if the law worried about anything this far from the county seat. He looked at the meal back against the cabin. About time for the ugly bird to fetch Mr. Anselm's meal. "What's the ugly bird?" I asked, but he didn't have to answer. It must have hung over us high and quiet, and now it dropped into the yard like a fish hawk into a pond. First out I saw it was dark, heavy-winged, bigger than a buzzard. Then I saw the shiny gray-black of body like wet slate, and how it seemed to have feathers only on its wide wings. Then I made out the thin, snaky neck, the bulgy head, the long stork beak, the eyes set in front of its head. Man fashion in front, not to each side. The feet that taloned onto the sack showed pink and smooth with 5 graspy toes. The wings snapped like a tablecloth in the wind, and it churned away over the trees with a mill sack. "That's the ugly bird," said Mr. Bristow. I barely heard him. Mr. Anselm has companioned with it ever since I recollect. I never saw such a bird, I said. Must be a scarce one. You know what struck me while I watched it? I do know, John. Its feet look like Mr. Anselm's hands. Might it be, I asked, that a hoodoo man like Mr. Anselm knows what way to shape himself into a bird? He shook his head. It's known that when he's at one place, the ugly bird's been sighted at another. He tried to change the subject. Silver strings on your guitar, never heard of any but steel strings. In the olden days, I told him, silver was used many times for strings. It gives more of a singy sound. In my mind, I had it the subject wouldn't be changed. I tried a chord on my guitar and began to sing. You all have heard of the ugly bird, so curious and so queer, that flies its flight by day and night and fills folks' hearts with fear. I never come here to hide from fear, and I give you my promised word that I soon expect to twist the neck of the goddamn ugly bird. When I finished, Mr. Bristow felt in his pocket. I was going to bid you eat with me, he said, but here, maybe you better buy something. He gave me a quarter and a dime. I about gave them back, but I thanked him and I walked down the same trail Mr. Anselm had gone. Mr. Bristow watched me, looking shrunk up. My song had scared him, so I kept singing it. Oh, ugly bird, you snoop and sneak and thieve. This place can't be for you and me, and one of us has got to leave. Singing, I tried to remember all I'd heard or read or guessed that might help toward my ugly bird study. Didn't witch people have partner animals? I'd read and heard tell about the animals called familiars, mostly cats or black dogs or the like, but maybe sometimes birds. That might be the secret, or a right much of it, for the ugly bird wasn't Mr. Anselm's other self. Mr. Bristow had said the two of them were seen different places at one time. Mr. Anselm didn't turn into the ugly bird then. They were just close partners, brothers, with the ugly bird's feet like Mr. Anselm's hands. I wared of something in the sky, the big black V of a flying creature. It quartered over me, half as high as the highest woolly scrap of cloud. Once or twice it seemed like it would stoop for me like a hawk for a rabbit, but it didn't. Looking up and letting my feet find the trail, I rounded a bunch of bushes, and there on a rotten log in the clearing sat Mr. Anselm. His gored head sank on his thin neck, his elbows set on knees, and the soft, pink, long hands hid his face as if he was miserable. His look made me feel disgusted. I came toward him. You don't feel so brash, do you? I asked. Go away, he sort of gulped, soft and sick. Why? I wanted to know. I like it here. Sitting on the log, I pulled my guitar across me. I feel like singing, Mr. Anselm. His father got hung for horse stealing. His mother got burned for a witch. And his only friend is the ugly bird, the dirty son of a... Something hit me like a shooting star from overhead. It hit my back and shoulder. It knocked me floundering forward on one hand and one knee. It was only the mercy of God I didn't fall on my guitar and smash it. I crawled forward a few scrambles and made it up, shaky and dizzy. The ugly bird had flown down and dropped a sack of meal on me. Now it skimmed across the clearing. At the height of the low branches, its eyes glinting at me, and its mouth came open a little. I saw teeth, sharp and mean, like a garpike's teeth. It swooped for me, and the wind of its wings was colder than the winter storm. Without stopping to think, I flung up my both hands to box it off from me. And it gave back, flew backward like the biggest, devilishest hummingbird ever seen in a nightmare. I was too dizzy and scared to wonder why it gave back. I had barely the wit to be thankful. Get out of here, moaned Mr. Anselm, who hadn't even stirred. I shamed to say that I got my hands up and backed across the clearing and into the trail beyond. Then I half realized where my luck had been. My hands had lifted the guitar toward the ugly bird, and somehow it didn't like the guitar. Just once I looked back. The ugly bird was perching on the log, and it sort of nuzzled up to Mr. Anselm, most horrible. They were sure enough close together. I stumbled off away. I just found a stream with stones to make steps across. I turned and walked down to where it made a wide pool. There I knelt and washed my face. It looked pallid in the water image, and sat with my back to a tree and hugged my guitar and rested. I shook all over. I must have felt as bad for a while as Mr. Anselm looked like he felt, sitting on the log waiting for his ugly bird. And what else? Had he been hungry, sick, or just evil? I couldn't say which. After a while, I walked back to the trail and along it again, till I came to what must have been the only store thereabouts. It faced one way on a rough road that could carry wagon and car traffic, and the trail joined on and reached the door. The building wasn't big, but it was good, made of sawed planks, well painted. It rested on big rocks instead of posts, and had roofed open like a porch, with a bench where people could sit. Opening the door, I went in. You'll find many such stores in backcountry places through the land, counters, shelves, and cans and packages. Smoked meat hung one corner, glass front ice box for fresh meat. One point, sign says U.S. Post Office with a half dozen pigeonholes for letters and a couple of cigar boxes for stamps and money order blanks. The proprietor wasn't in, only a girl scared and shaking, and Mr. Anselm there ahead of me, telling her what he wanted. He wanted her. I don't care if Sam Heaver did leave you in charge here, he said with the music in his voice. He won't stop my taking you with me. Then he swung around and fixed his squint eye and wide open eye on me, like two mismatched gun muzzles. You again, he said. He looked hale and hearty. I strayed my hands over the guitar strings, and he twisted up his face as if it colicked him. Winnie, he said to the girl, wait on him and get him out of here. Her eyes were round in her scared face. I never saw as sweet as a face of hers, or as scared. Her hair was dark and thick. It was like the thundercloud before the rain comes down. It made her paleness look paler. She was small, and she cowered for fear of Mr. Anselm. Yes, sir, she said to me. A box of crackers, I decided, pointing to a near shelf and a can of those sardine fish. She put them on the counter. I dug out the quarter Mr. Bristow had given me and slapped it down on the counter between the girl and Mr. Anselm. Get away, he squeaked, shrill and mean as a bat. He had jumped back almost halfway across the floor, and for once both of his eyes were big. What's the matter? I asked him, purely wondering. This is a good silver quarter, and I picked it up and held it out for him to take and study. But he ran out of the store like a rabbit with dogs after it. The girl he had called Winnie just leaned against the wall as if she was tired. I asked, why did he light out like that? She took the quarter. It doesn't scare me much, she said, and rung it up in the old cash register. All that scares me is Mr. Anselm. I picked up the crackers and sardines. He's courting you? She shuddered. Though it was warm, I'd sooner be in a hole with a snake than be courted by Mr. Anselm. Why not just tell him to leave you be? He'd not listen. He always does what he pleases, him. Nobody dares stop him. I know. I heard about the mules he stopped and the poor lady he dumbed. I returned to the other subject. Why did he squinch away from money? I'd reckon he loved money. She shook her head. The thundercloud hair stirred. He never needs any. Takes what he wants without paying. Including you? Not including me yet, but he'll do that later. I laid down my dime I had left. Let's have a Coke drink, you and me. She rang up the dime, too. There was a sort of dry chuckle at the door, like a stone rattling down the well. I looked quick and saw two long, dark wings flop away from the door. The ugly bird had spied. But the girl Winnie smiled over her Coke drink. I asked permission to open my fish and crackers on the bench outside. She nodded yes. Out there, I worried, opened the can with my pocket knife and had my meal. When I finished, I put the trash in a garbage barrel and tuned my guitar. Winnie came out and harked while I sang about the girl whose hair was like the thundercloud before the rain comes down, and she blushed till she was pale no more. Then we talked about Mr. Anselm and the ugly bird, and how they had been seen in two different places at once. "But," said Winnie, "who's seen them together?" "Shoot, I have," I told her, "not long ago." And I told how Mr. Anselm sat all sick and miserable, and the conifer bird crowded up against him. She heard all that with eyes staring off, as if looking for something far away. Finally, she said, "John, you say it crowded up to him?" "It did that thing, as if it studied to get right inside of him." "Inside of him?" "That's right." "Well, that makes me think of something I heard somebody say about hoodoo folks," she said. "How the hoodoo folks sometimes put a stuff out, mostly in dark rooms, and it's part of them, but it takes the shape and mind of another person. Once in a while, the shape and mind of an animal." "Shoo," I said again. "Now you mention it, I've heard the same thing. It might explain those Louisiana stories about werewolves." "Shape and mind of an animal," she repeated herself. "Maybe the shape and mind of a bird, and they call it ectoplasm. I remember, that's right. I've seen pictures they say were taken of such stuff. It seems to live. It'll yell if you grab it or hit or stab it." "Could maybe," she began, but a musical voice interrupted. "He's been around here long enough," said Mr. Anselm. He was back. With him were 3 men, Mr. Bristow and a tall, gawky man with splay shoulders and a black, stubbled chin, and a soft, smooth, grizzled man with an old fancy vest over his white shirt. Mr. Anselm acted like the leader of a posse. "Sam Heaver," he crooned at the low, soft, grizzled one. "Can tramps loaf at your store?" The soft old storekeeper looked dead and gloomy at me. "Better get going, son," he said, as if he had memorized it. I laid my guitar on a bench. "You men ail my stomach," I said, looking at them. "You let this half-born, half-bred hoodoo man sick you on me like hound dogs when I'm hurting nobody and nothing." "Better go," he said again. I faced Mr. Anselm, and he laughed like a sweetly played horn. "You," he said, "without a dime in your pocket, you can't do anything to anybody." Without a dime. The ugly bird had seen me spend my silver money, the silver money that ailed Mr. Anselm. "Take his guitar," said Mr. Anselm, and the gawky man, clumsy but quick, grabbed the guitar from the bench and backed away to the door. "That takes care of him," Mr. Anselm sort of purred, and he fairly jumped and grabbed Winnie by the wrist. He pulled her along the trail, and I heard her whimper. "Stop it," I bawled, but they stood and looked, scared and dumb. Mr. Anselm, still holding Winnie, faced me. He lifted his free hand, with a pink forefinger sticking out like the barrel of a pistol. Just the look he gave me made me weary and dizzy. He was going to hoodoo me, like he had done the mules, like he had done the woman who tried to hide her cake from him. I turned from him, sick and afraid, and I heard him giggle. Thinking he had won already, in the doorway stood the gawky man called Hob with the guitar. I made a long jump at him and started to wrestle it away from him. "Hang on to it, Hob," I heard Mr. Anselm sort of choke out from Mr. Bristow. "There's the ugly bird." Its wings flapped like a storm in the air behind me, but I'd torn my guitar from Hob's hands and turned on my heel. A little way off, Mr. Anselm stood stiff and straight as a stone figure in front of Courthouse. He still held Winnie's wrist. Between them, the ugly bird came swooping at me, its beak pointing for me like a stabbing bayonet. I dug in my toes and I smashed the guitar at it, full slam. I struck its bulgy head above the beak and across the eyes, and I heard the polished wood of my music maker crash to splinters. And down went the ugly bird. Down it went. Quiet it lay, its great big wings stretched out on either side without a flutter. Its beak was driven into the ground like a nail. It didn't kick or flop or stir, not even once. But Mr. Anselm, standing where he stood holding Winnie, screamed out the way you might scream if something had clawed out all your insides with a single, tearing grab. He didn't move. I don't even know if his mouth came open. Winnie gave a pull with all her strength and tottered back, clear of him. And as if only his hold on her had kept him standing, Mr. Anselm slapped over and down on his face. his arms flung out like the ugly bird's wings, his face in the dirt like the ugly bird's face. Still holding my guitar broken by the neck like a club, I ran to him and stooped. "Get up," I said, and I took hold of what hair he had, lifted his face up. One look was enough. From the war, I know a dead man when I see one. I let go of his hair and his face went back into the dirt, as if it belonged there. The others moved, at last, tottering a few steps closer, and they didn't act like enemies now. For Mr. Anselm, who had made them act so, was down and dead. Then Hob gave a scared shout, and we looked that way. The ugly bird all of a sudden looked rotten and mushy, and was soaking into the ground. To me, anyhow, it looked shadowy and misty, and I could see through it. I wanted to move close, then I didn't want to. It was melting away like snow on top of a stove, only no wetness left behind. It was gone, while we watched and wondered and felt bad all over. Mr. Bristow knelt and turned Mr. Anselm over. On the dead face ran sick lines across, thin and purple, as though he had been struck down by a blow of a toaster or a gridiron. "The guitar strings," said Mr. Bristow, "the silver guitar strings. It finished him, like any hoodoo man. That was it. Won't a silver bullet kill a witch, or a silver knife a witch's cat, and a silver key locks out ghosts, doesn't it?" "What was the word you said?" whispered Winnie to me. "Ectoplasm," I told her. Like his soul coming out and getting struck dead outside the body. More important was talk about what to do now. The men decided they allowed to report the county seat that Mr. Anselm's heart had stopped on him, which it had. They went over the tale 3 or 4 times to make sure they'd all tell it the same. They cheered up as they talked. You never saw gladder people to get rid of a neighbor. "And John," said Mr. Bristow, "we'd sure enough be proud if you stayed here. You took this curse off of us." Hob wanted me to come live on his farm and help him work it on shares. Sam Heaver offered me all the money out of his old cash register. I thanked him and said no, sir. To Hob I said thank you kindly, I'd better not. If they wanted their story to stick with the sheriff, they'd better forget I'd been around when Mr. Anselm's heart stopped. All I was sorry for was my broken guitar. But while we had talked, Mr. Bristow was gone. He came back with a guitar from his place, and he acted honored if I'd take it in place of mine. So I tightened my silver strings on it and tried a chord or two. Winnie swore she'd pray for me by name each night of her life. And I told her that would sure see me safe from any assaults of the devil. "Assaults of the devil, John," she said, almost shrill in the voice. She was earnest. "It's you who drove the devil from this valley." The others all said they agreed on that. "It was foretold about you in the Bible," said Winnie, her voice soft again. "There was a man sent from God whose name was John." But that was far too much for her to say, and I was abashed. I said goodbye all around in a hurry. I strummed my new guitar as I walked away until I got an old song back in my mind. I've heard tell that songs written in an old-time book called Percy's Frolics or Relics or something. "Lady, I never loved witchcraft, never dealt in privy wile, but evermore held the highway of love and honor free from guile." And though I couldn't bring myself to look back to the place I was leaving forever, I knew that Winnie watched me and that she listened till she had to strain her ears to catch the last, faintest end of my song.
Man, that is such a cool story. And I love this idea of, it's so cool to me that it's like early night, Manly Wade Wellman and this character, Silver John.
Mm-hmm.
I love the concept of these sort of traveling heroes.
Me too.
And in so many ways, especially with Silver John, they're these accidental heroes.
Right.
That end up on this path of, helping other people and ultimately sort of defeating evil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so cool and, dare I say, a unique concept, especially for the time, to have this hero who has these like not only is he a cool songwriter, not only does he have this cool guitar that happens to have silver strings on it, and I loved that part in this story where the guy's like, silver strings? I never heard of that.
Yeah, yeah. And he's like, well, it makes it more singy.
Yeah, and then later on, it talks about how, like, oh, the silver strings, that's the only thing that can get rid of a hoodoo man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's cool. And I mean, in this, I only learned this in the research that like all of his like main characters like have this like something made of silver to kind of fight against the supernatural.
Right, man, it's just so cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think he's sort of like one of those like if you know kind of characters. I know several of our listeners are aware of him, and I don't know. I'm glad that first there's hopefully you guys could hear the parallels between this story and the one from Kentucky.
Yeah,
it kind of makes me wonder. So the thing that happened in Kentucky was like early 1900s, and then it makes me wonder. Like, is this one of those pieces of folklore that he heard about and was like, oh, man, I'm going to turn this into a story?
Oh, maybe,
and if so, super smart, dude. Heard the whistle.
Probably. Yeah, it is interesting. Also, I think, with the Oh Ugly Bird, the Silver John story, he talks about the bird having like teeth and having like 5 like talons that look like the fingers of the sort of the bad guy. And I don't know, it is interesting, that idea of the merging, that sort of hybrid character, hybrid like flying humanoid kind of thing. It is really creepy. It actually, you know what it reminds me of? It makes me think of the first Beetlejuice.
Okay.
The dad or the guy when they do the weird like faces.
Oh, the face stretch thing?
Yeah, it's like real long.
Yeah.
It's super creepy.
Yeah. That's funny that was the imagery in your mind. For me, it was just kind of like, I think it's interesting that like the creature sort of took on the characteristics of Mr. Anselm.
Yeah.
And even just like the way that all worked reminds me so much of things in almost like fantasy writing too, man, with magic and stuff to be able to sort of almost project your consciousness into another creature, or another creature basically borrowing yours, almost like a familiar.
Yeah.
Like terms like that Wellman uses, man, I mean, it's like, I feel like this guy could come, he writes these books that, although told in a more like Southern sort of language and twang and stuff, could be modern day tales that I think everybody could enjoy. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That so many of these things just haven't been made into a, here we go again. We're making other people millionaires here.
Well, no. So I haven't seen it, but I did just run across a video because I've been on this like big, first Mignola and then Manly Wade Wellman kick again, where they were talking about how like, which I guess is on YouTube now, but there's a movie called Hillbilly John. That was a movie made in like 79, I think. And any of your like hardcore Silver John, like the book or the stories fans, like they hated it because Silver John in the books he's very like super intelligent, super just like self-aware, kind of always has like the answer to things. Whereas like I think in this movie Hillbilly John, he's kind of like a dumb redneck who just kind of like gets lucky in these situations, when in the books like he's kind of the opposite. He always kind of like figures it. He's like a great like hero, Right. I mean, he is still kind of like unassuming, where it's like, oh, he's just this like Appalachian like, loner traveler character, but
yeah.
But I do want to...
It kind of reminds me of David Carradine in Kung Fu.
A little bit.
And even like the old Hulk TV show, like there's this wandering guy who isn't trying to be a hero. He's just forced into those situations and, becomes one.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that was one of my favorites. It's, I know that it's, it's one of those stories where listening to it and not reading it, it could be a little difficult at times, much like our earlier episode where we're reading from like Foxfire, where like the sort of possessive language of each of the characters can kind of get confusing, and he's using like the Appalachian sort of dialect and stuff. But man, I'm just like, I don't know if it's because I'm, originally from this area, but I cannot get enough. Like, I think that merge of like Appalachia and the other thing too is like which I mean, you have like several of his books, which I'm super jealous of. But Silver John also like encounters like weird like robots, that look like 10-foot tall like George Washington robot. And like all these weird concepts that, like you were saying, Woody, it's just so ahead of its time.
For sure. And like in seemingly odd choice for our October Spooktacular, but in my opinion, that's I think why I like it the most. Us talking about these bird-like humanoids and this story, it's I haven't really heard that before.
Yeah, right.
On any other show. And so I just loved it. That's why I was like, man, we got to do this. This is really neat. And again, it just adds that extra layer of spooky to the thought of something just flying above the skies that, we might not know in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah. Death from above.
Exactly.
So if you enjoyed this, stick around, come back. If you want to talk to us, head on over to our Instagram. That's the majority of our activity online. If you want to give us your own story, your own, localized sort of urban legend or your own paranormal scenario that you've caught yourself in, shoot us a DM or send it over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Even better is send in your own story in your own voice over to thatwouldberadpodcast.com, our website, where you can leave a voice memo and tell your story, and it may make it in a future episode. If you're not getting enough, That Would Be Rad, and you want a little bit more, especially around this time, which is our favorite time of year, head over to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail, where it's kind of more of what you love. It's a little loosier, a little goosier, a little later at night usually that we record, and it really helps us out. It really helps keep the train on the tracks, and it really is probably the best way to support the show, I would say. Leave a 5-star review. Tell that friend that's into, anything weird and, off the beaten path. Tell that friend about the show. It really makes a big difference. And I guess that's it. We got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man.
All right. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. Stay spooky. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already had it death before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.